They say when we embrace minds, we unlock limitless potential. But what happens if a child's mind moves faster than the world around them? ADHD is often misunderstood, and it's seen as a challenge rather than a unique way of thinking. Today, we're diving deep into what ADHD actually is, how it affects children and families, and what's the best way to support neurodivergent minds. Joining me is Aalia Thobani, founder of the Brain Accelerator, who's also a speech and language pathologist and learning development specialist, who has years of international expertise helping children thrive. Whether you're a parent, an educator, or just curious about ADHD, don't go anywhere, because this episode is for you. Aalia, for those who just clicked onto this episode and who aren't familiar with the incredible things that you're doing here across the board, can you give us a little bit of a background on who you are, what you do, and what gets you up every day?
Thank you, Raya, for having me on this podcast. I'm so excited to be here. I am, Raya, on a mission to change the dysfunctional beliefs that we hold about learning and to give parents and individuals hope. Because our brains hold an immense amount of cognitive potential. Given the right kind of inputs, the right kind of environments, we can turn, any challenge or any struggle into success. We can help brains think better, learn faster, and perform even better than they are right now.
That's amazing.
So that is my mission. That's my calling at this point in time.
Yeah.
I have been in the field of changing brains for 20 years.
It's a long time. It's a very long time.
Yes, working, as a speech and language pathologist, as a learning specialist, as a coach. And, throughout my years, my thesis has always been about what is the best neuroscientific way to get the best, the most optimal results when it comes to learning and performance. And this is why I'm so excited about what we're doing at the Brain Accelerator, because it's all about understanding root causes of struggle and also understanding cognitive profiles so we can optimize as much as we can enable, better success for struggling minds too. And it's just the outcomes have been absolutely incredible. So I'm very excited. Yeah.
It's just, I think the work that you do dispels so much confusion. And, let's say, for example, you've got a parent who contacts you. Who are typically the kids? I mean, why would they be contacting you? What is the concern when they reach out to somebody like you?
So I would say that I have maybe two pools.
Yeah.
So parents that are contacting me because of some type of struggle that their children are enduring, right? Whether that be homework with tears or school is hard, child is not living up to potential, reading is difficult, math is hard. So there is some kind of struggle or even just a lack of motivation. Suddenly this term or this year, my son doesn't want to go to school anymore.
Yeah.
Something's shifted, something's changed, right? So it can be for struggle. And then I have another pool that are contacting me for optimization purposes, because we are living in an age where, AI is inevitable, right? So what is it that we need to do to our brains to ensure that we are, enhancing critical thinking, other 21st century skills, resilience building, grit, creativity, problem solving abilities. So that's another category of parents that I'm working with as well.
That's amazing. So it is two different camps. Mm-hmm. It's you're literally looking at potentially for a problematic issue, and then you're also looking to enhance.
Yes.
This is within the Brain Accelerator.
Yes, that's right. So basically what happens is when an individual, a child comes in, we do a test. The test is called the Gibson test. And it gives us an idea of the cognitive profile of a child. Actually, we work with adults too.
Okay.
So it can be children as young as 4.5 and adults as old as 120 or however old we're living to these days.
Yeah.
And the idea is that once we have an understanding of the cognitive profile of the child, we know where the strengths lie okay, which is so important because we really want to be harnessing that. That is the USP of the child, right? And it's very important for the education system, for teachers and for parents to know that. And then we're also looking for the areas of struggle because, no child is going to be a 10 out of 10 on everything, right? Or even, if you think about a group in the workplace, right? No one's going to be a 10 out of 10 on everything. That's why there's diversity. That's why we need diversity. However, we do want to understand what is it that really sets my child apart from their strength in terms of their strengths, and what is it that could be holding them back. And we never want the weaknesses to be holding down the whole system. So we want to enable them so that, confidence and ultimate potential can be achieved.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So obviously, today's topic, we've kind of narrowed it down to ADHD and to almost jump straight into it. Before we were recording, just our constant chat, just me and you, there is a lot of concern about ADHD and there is a lot of misinformation around it. And parents are kind of almost at their wits' end trying to make pieces out of this puzzle. So to ask the expert, what exactly is ADHD?
So the official definition involves 3 parts. So there is an inattention component, hyperactivity, and an impulsivity. And also I would like to add to that emotional dysregulation. Okay. And you can have different combinations. An individual can have different combinations. So it can be predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive / impulsive. And you would certainly see the emotional dysregulation in that category. And the third is a combined diagnosis. Okay. And it is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which is multifactorial. Okay. So it's genetics. There's a genetic predisposition. That's what loads the gun. And there is an environmental factor that pulls the trigger. Okay. So what is it about the environment that's a little bit hard to pinpoint because it is very much multifactorial. So it could be just, the neurotransmitter dysfunction, or it could be, structural brain differences, or it could be environmental factors like, preterm babies or, toxins in the environment. Or I would say in this day and age, it's important to consider that are we triggering some of the symptoms of ADHD that may already, so maybe there's a disposition and then there's a triggering of the environment with, the way we're eating, the way we're sleeping, the way we're constantly on our screens, and we're choosing dopamine hits versus oxytocin, which is the connection piece and the feel-good hormone, right? And so we are constantly making those choices. And that is certainly triggering a brain in a certain direction. Right. So being aware also that, parents have a lot of stress. It is a very fast paced life these days in modern society. So even, kind of connecting with our children, finding time for that attunement, that emotional, attunement is also something that we want to consider as what we would modify when we are working with children who do have ADHD. And one more aspect, which is interesting, is that a child who does have a diagnosis of ADHD is more sensitive to the environment. So can have more allergies, for example, can be just a lot more sensitive to sensory input as well. And so that can in and of itself create a bit of a vicious cycle when it comes to the triggering of symptoms.
Are those sort of early warning signs? Or could potentially be early warning signs?
So I wouldn't say the allergens, but I would say that what you want to look out for is my child, overly active, for example. Okay, so like high activity levels. So constantly on the move, jumping around, constantly on the move, jumping around, climbing, all kinds of things in the house where they shouldn't be. So very hyperactive or very short attention span. So hard to stick to one toy for, longer than a minute, jumping around from one toy to the next. That can be another indicator. Super impulsive. So sometimes you might get feedback from school that my child just, your child just hit a kid, or your child is continuously snatching and interrupting, and not really listening. Okay. Big emotions and quick triggers to these big emotions. So like having a significant amount of meltdowns and being being triggered like by what my other kids may not be triggered by. Like, oh, I was supposed to be first in line, or I lost that game and I don't wanted to win that game, you know?
Yeah.
And also difficulty following routines. Now, we need to be aware of what's normal development and then what is a little bit, maybe something that you may be a bit concerned about.
Yeah.
And so you really want to be looking for patterns in multiple environments, okay? And you want to be looking to see if it's a persistent and consistent concern. And if it's, if it really is affecting the quality of life of the child and of the family, right? And as a parent, really looking to trust your gut instinct. If you're like, it just doesn't feel right, or it's different from my other child, or I feel like there's something I want to look into, then the invitation is to go to a believable source. When I say believable, it's talking
not
about
Google, you mean?
I'm talking about Ray Dalio's term. I actually really love it, because it's like, a lot of times we will go to who we think is the gold standard. Maybe it's our parents, or maybe it's, our, general medicine practitioner, or maybe it's the teacher, or, and that's wonderful. And they may not be the deep experts. Okay, so the invitation is to go to the most believable source. So that would be a developmental pediatrician, a developmental psychologist. That would be a good place to start if you're concerned. Yeah.
So these particular, I would say, I don't want to call them warning signs, but these kind of behaviors, is that at what age do you think that these could be more evident, that a parent will sort of have a little light bulb to say, you know what, maybe I should go seek a developmental psychologist, somebody who is going to potentially be my trusted source?
So from my point of view, I'm all about getting in as early as possible, okay? Because that can only help your child, okay? Versus if you wait too long, all right? The brain can always change. So I'm not worried about the brain changing. I'm just, wanting to take advantage of the neuroplasticity that exists in the early years, where neurons are firing at a faster pace than any other time.
Just to stop you there.
Yes.
Neuroplasticity.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay. So it's your brain's ability to form new connections, okay? And strengthen connections that exist, almost like creating, superhighways that are working in the favor of your child, okay? So sometimes those highways, because when you use the incorrect pathways for longer periods of time, that's what gets strengthened, right?
Okay.
So if you're catching the pathway disruption earlier, you actually have the opportunity
to redirect
it, right? And then once those superhighways have been formed through intensity, right, and environmental factors and other neuroscientific factors, then it's like you've built a superhighway from, the marina to Dara. So that's great. So now you don't need to use the inside roads anymore.
Got you.
And that's the whole idea.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So get it early, and then, you take advantage of that level of neuroplasticity.
Yes, 100%. And that means that you don't necessarily need to go in for a formal diagnosis at the beginning, right? Because, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what
so
you're saying.
So the idea for me is like, get in with some kind of intervention that is based on symptomology.
Okay.
Yeah. So what does that mean? It means that, and typically you're going to, what's going to be most obvious is those children who are more hyperactive and impulsive, because you are going to hear from the school about that. You're going to notice that your child is behaving a certain way versus other kids are not. So typically that's going to be, what you are going to discover those symptoms earlier on. And what I would say about that is, certainly there's no harm for just speaking with a developmental pediatrician, who, will just be, anyway, you're going to see a pediatrician. It might as well be a developmental pediatrician.
That's right.
Just so they're able to keep track of the milestones. And then, I would check functional medicine aspects, for example, diet, sleep, any vitamins that might be deficient. I think that's important. I would say if your child is hyperactive and impulsive, occupational therapy is always a good thing to do. Okay. So what is occupational therapy?
Absolutely my next question. What is that? What is occupational
therapy?
therapy?
Occupational therapy, there are, they work with multiple different aspects of the motor system, the sensory system, and the reflex system.
Okay.
Okay. So you want to be, and there's certain occupational therapists that deal with primitive reflexes and the integration of those. And certainly if there is hyperactivity and impulsivity, we want to make sure that your reflexes have been integrated. Sensory integration, which is your ability to kind of just how you perceive senses in your environment. And that's very important to identify whether your child is hyper or hyposensitive and in what areas. And then movement, right, is such an important part when you are a child with ADHD in terms of even optimizing your learning. And so getting in the right kinds of movements that can help your child regulate is very, very necessary.
Brilliant.
And so occupational therapy is important. A family and education-based systems approach is also really important, because when we read Gabor Mate's Scattered Minds, and I 100% recommend if you are dealing with some kind of symptomology like this, or if your child has been diagnosed, that encourage the educators, encourage the parents to please read this book, because it is a very compassionate view on how to handle ADHD, okay? And we really do have to look at it from a systems point of view. When a parent is overly anxious, the child will be overly anxious, and it does create its own kind of vicious cycle there, okay?
Absolutely.
So we do have to do our own work as parents and create an environment that is conducive for positive impact for our child. And then, with the Brain Accelerator, we do start at around 4.5, and we work directly with the attention-based pathways.
Okay.
And so if there are significant signs and symptoms, you could perhaps, get an early diagnosis around 4 or 5 from, some of the experts I mentioned. Or, the typical range would be around 6. Okay. Is when
Sort
you
of
may go in for.
coincides when they're in sort of like a school environment.
Yes, and maybe, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's just such a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I feel it's such a loaded
Yes.
topic.
Yes.
With that, there's obviously misconceptions. What are the biggest ones that you sort of come across, I guess, in your line of work?
Yeah. So I would say that, so 5 to 7% of children are diagnosed with ADHD. Okay. And there are so many other comorbidities that can exist with hyperactivity and impulsivity. And so sometimes it can be very difficult to tease it apart.
So that sort of warrants a misdiagnosis kind of thing.
So that's why I say in the early years, it's nice to just begin some kind of intervention based on the symptomology. And then as the child gets a bit older, that might be a better, juncture to have a formal diagnosis. And certainly, there are red flags from a young age. They don't necessarily warrant that formal diagnosis, like I mentioned, but certainly they warrant the intervention.
Gotcha.
Go in and get some help, whether it be for attention concerns, whether it be for other reasons you may be concerned, right? And the other thing that I think is just really, really sad and upsetting for me to witness, and I'm witnessing this too much, okay, is basically the cycle of shame that children and families are put through, okay? It is, children with impulsivity and hyperactivity and emotional dysregulation are immediately kind of defined and classified as, they just like behavioral kids.
Yeah, disruptive.
Disruptive.
They're sort of boxed in.
They're just being boxed in, and it comes with a lot of consequences, right? Because, we need to discipline this kid. Disciplinary action.
They don't have any boundaries, or they're just naughty, or back in my day, we used to do this. And it's just this level of, it's again, lack of maybe education, lack of communication as to what potentially the child needs.
Yes.
I think that's where there's a lot of clash.
100%. And it takes these families to the cycles of shame where there's a failure to meet expectation, okay, because they're unable to manage their emotional outbursts, okay, and their dysregulations and their bodily movements. And then there's a lot of external criticism from teachers, from the whole education system, from parents, from peers, okay? And then that leads to internalized shame. So I've had 5-year-olds, okay, and this is what brings tears to my eyes. And the way they talk to themselves, right? The dysfunctional things that they say, like, my brain is just not working, or I'm just not good at that, or, it's heart-wrenching, and it's not okay. It's just not okay. And that creates more behavioral fallout and this whole vicious cycle, which is just unacceptable. And the number of schools that reject these types of kids, and where do parents go?
Where do they go? I mean, this is what I don't understand. You know, a lot of the times when we're talking about ADHD, and I think this is again linked to what we're just saying, there's a lot of sort of this type of behavior is very much linked to, oh, he's just being a disruptive boy. This boy needs, he needs to, they're not as mature as little girls.
Yeah.
So, again, you are boxed into a little, I don't know, whatever it is, a little pigeonhole, thinking that now, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Where do I go? Who are the teachers? What type of schools? Should I homeschool? What should I, how can I help? And then that is a full-on cascade of almost like panic decisions.
100%. It's been so hard to witness this, okay, amongst many, many, many families. And what I would say is that we really need to educate ourselves as teachers, as, principals, as parents, okay, to what it means to have a compassionate approach to dealing with ADHD, okay? We need to be supportive. We need to be inclusive. We need systems that are able to identify the strengths of our child, so we're able to leverage the strengths of each child, because, with children with ADHD, it's also not just a difficulty with attention, it's a difficulty with regulating attention. So they can be so attentive when it's something that's they're really interested in, right? So can't we harness that, right? And use that to the kid's advantage? And in the same way, addressing the challenges that they face so that we're optimizing their areas of weakness and creating support systems, within the school environment, and creating a team around the child, because so much of the time we're working in silos. You have the occupational therapist working separately from the speech therapist, working separately from the school, and it's just not serving the child. So we really need a holistic systems approach when it comes to working with our children. And I do have some recommendations from Gabor Mate's book, which again, I highly recommend. The idea of connection before correction. Okay, and this is something that can be implemented in the classrooms, something that teachers can be trained on, right? So instead of, oh my gosh, you hit that boy, like you go sit in that thinking corner right now.
You're going to X, whatever it is, office.
Yeah. The idea is, let me connect first, right? Let me get down and co-regulate with this child, because the child knows that it was something that was out of his control and feels bad about it and feels the shame around it. So you kind of adding to that shame is not helping the situation, right? So get down to the child's level, connect with that child, and help them feel heard and listened to. And I'm actually at this juncture, I will continue, and then I want to talk about the brain.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We want to avoid overwhelming the child. So certainly if they've had an outburst, they're already overwhelmed, and then you sending them into a corner overwhelms them even further and could create more behavioral fallout. Okay. So calm their systems down. Okay. Provide structure and predictability and external scaffolding, right? Prepare them. This is what, is going to happen today. You have, you're going to school, and then after school, you're going to go see Miss Aalia at the Brain Accelerator. And then, so prepare them for change, even though we also want them to be able to navigate difficult situations. However, from a school's point of view, to keep things in check, the more predictable the schedule is, the better it is for the child.
Does that apply to everyday life, not just the school thing?
And I would say that too. I would say that, kind of a systematic approach is good. Yeah. And if you are introducing change, it should be in very small bursts.
You do want bite-sized change.
Bite-sized change.
That can be sort of accepted easily.
Yes.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm like that.
Yeah.
100%. I'm not 7. I'm almost 40.
Yeah.
I don't like big change, and I like to know what my schedule is. And if things yes, I can adapt and be flexible, but I'm a bit thrown off.
Yes, 100%. And so if it's a child who's even more sensitive to that, they're going to flip their lid, and we're going to talk about that in a
Yeah.
second. They're going to flip their lid. So, be prepared that, when there's change, when there's transition, if you're going from school to a holiday, if you're coming back from a holiday, if you've moved house, expect and be calm about the fact that your child might not be able to regulate their feelings that day, that week, as effectively, right? You want to minimize distractions, okay? Emphasize positive reinforcement. Teach self-regulation skills when the child is in a calm state, not when the child's not.
No.
You want to allow for movement breaks throughout the day. That's super important. You want to foster autonomy. So decision-making, choice-making, even if it's something really minor, like, do you want the red chalk or the blue chalk? Oh, I want the blue chalk.
Yeah.
Great. We all want to feel
Yeah,
autonomous in our
absolutely.
decision-making.
You made that decision.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Collaborate with the child rather than confronting the child. Confronting is just hard versus collaborating with them is a much better approach. Maintaining empathy, maintaining patience, communicating with the other parents and professionals, so you're creating a team, and adjusting your expectations, like we mentioned, if the child has just come back from a holiday, or, there is going to be a bit of a challenge and a bit of a disruption.
Yeah.
Right? And actually, it's probably a good juncture if we talk about the brain and how it's... So for those who are watching, you can see my hand. And for those of you who are listening, try and do this, okay, as well. So we're just going to put up your right hand, okay? And this is Daniel Siegel's hand-brain model. And it's an incredible way for you to talk to your children about their brains and for you to understand your own brains as well.
I'm in. Hands up.
Yeah.
Hands up.
So basically your wrist and down to a little bit of your forearm, let's say that's your brain stem. Okay. So this controls your bodily functions, your breathing, your heart rate, and also your fight and flight modality. Okay. And now you're going to bend your thumb, okay, over into your palm. Okay. And this is your limbic system, or your emotional brain. Okay. And it's part of the, mammalian brain. Okay. All right. And it also houses the amygdala. Okay.
Yes.
Which is
I've heard so much about the amygdala, this ancient brain of ours. Yes.
And very important for emotional regulation. Okay. And the amygdala tends to be a bit more disrupted and dysregulated in a child who has ADHD.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then you have your fingers, the rest of your fingers, the four, you're going to put them over the thumb. Okay. And now these four fingers form your frontal cortex. Okay. So your frontal cortex is what makes you most human. It's the frontal part of your brain. Okay.
Sort of analysis and...
Yes, exactly. Your critical thinking, your problem solving, your self-regulation, your 21st century skills, okay, are housed in this part. Okay. And certainly when you have a child with ADHD, the frontal lobe takes longer to mature. That's why there's a lot more emotional dysregulation. And that's why also, children with ADHD can be messier, tend to be less organized, have less strategic thinking skills, right? So that's all housed in this frontal area. And it also means that, and guess what? Guess how long it takes for your frontal lobe to develop?
How long? Forever.
Well,
I don't know.
You're 25 and, you have to be 25 and then you can say, yes, my frontal lobe is actually developed at
25 years old.
25.
How
can you imagine?
We putting kids at university at 17, 18? And throwing them in school and just expecting them to just get on with it.
Yes. So this is very important for parents and educators to know. 25. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
And so decision-making, is, can be affected until that point in time, right?
Absolutely.
And what happens is that, if, there's a dysregulation, you flip your lid. Okay. You flip your lid and you kind of lose it. And that's where your amygdala, that's where your limbic system starts to take over your reactions.
Fires up.
Yes.
Got you.
Right? And so that just tends to be a lot more triggered.
So you've got no protection of your frontal lobe.
Yes.
Very cool.
And that's why for a child with ADHD, this is happening more because they're also a lot more sensitive to environmental stimuli, right? And it's also why your little, your child, and why it's normal to have meltdowns because this is what happens. And so you can't talk to your child when they've their lid is flipped.
You need them to calm down.
You need them to calm down before you can actually start to rationalize a little bit.
But this flipping motion,
yes,
there is an element of it's developmentally normal.
Yes, absolutely. This is developmentally normal until you're
25. Because I don't know, these days I'm flipping a lot and,
Yes, and over time you build, the wiring to be able to self-regulate.
Okay, so now we understood sort of the amygdala and our limbic brain, as well as our frontal cortex.
Yes.
Firing off. And that could potentially be, it is developmentally normal. But as I understood, that in somebody who has potentially ADHD, this happens more often than not, kind of thing.
Yes, especially when they're hyperactive, the impulsive, and then there's a lot of that emotional dysregulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, again, I'm a mom of 2 boys. A lot of the conversation is my children are very active. And I'm pretty sure, I think you've got a little boy, and the majority of the people that are listening will all agree that they don't have an off switch, boys. We are constantly on the go. There is a lot of energy in terms of impulsivity. I mean, again, I think it has to sort of it's related to the age. But a lot of the things that you are saying almost seems characteristics of a little boy. And it is, I mean, a lot of the times when I do read about ADHD, I only went to Google, but it had been stated that there is more of a prevalence of ADHD in boys rather than girls. I don't know what the statistic is.
Yes.
But what is going on with the boys and the girls and ADHD?
Yeah. So basically, the statistics are showing that boys are maybe 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls.
Why?
Because they have more of the externalizing symptoms. Okay. So when we talk about, remember the different types, boys tend to be more hyperactive and impulsive when they are, projecting their symptoms for ADHD. And so that's why, behavioral concerns get, certainly highlighted a lot earlier, versus girls who may have more of the inattention type of ADHD. And so that is not, even being noticed as much. And that has another negative effect, is that, children are slipping through the radar. Okay. So you really want to be a very attentive parent. And I really want parents to listen to this. Because, your child is in a school system with, 24 other kids in the classroom, etc. And if your child does not have overt behaviors, okay, and your child is just
coasting through.
Yeah, coasting through, it may not be identified until later. Okay. So if you have an instinct about this, okay, that I feel like my child is not attending as well as she should, or, then do something about it. Okay.
That niggly feeling. Something's off. Just go and see the right person.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Because, a lot of girls do slip through the radar, along with other, diagnoses as well. Like even with autism, there are very different symptomology when it comes to boys versus girls. So it really is important to be going to a developmental pediatrician that can really tease those, the different symptoms apart, depending on whether it's a boy or a girl.
I remember you were saying ages ago that there is this sort of, when it comes to girls with ADHD, there's this unwillingness to do the task, or if I'm not mistaken, or something along those lines, that they potentially just don't want to do it.
Yeah. So again, it goes back to that. It's not just a difficulty with attention. Now, when we talk about attention, there are different kinds of attention. Okay. And what a lot of parents will tell me is like, I don't think my child has an attention issue, or it's confusing to me because, my child can sit and do Lego for like 3 hours without moving. But then as soon as we try to do homework, the kid's out the door.
I mean, to be honest, you've just literally spoken to 90% of the parents. 100%.
Yes.
Absolutely. They can sit and do Lego with full concentration. You bring out math homework and they're kicking and screaming.
Yeah. So ADHD is about the regulation of your attention skills. Okay. So, what happens is and one thing, kind of related to the brain as well, is that the dopamine neurotransmitter, okay, is a little bit understimulated in a child with ADHD. Okay. So what does that mean? Is that they seek thrilling activities, novelty, something new, something very exciting and rewarding for them, because otherwise motivation, attention, is just not being, it's not actually being stimulated in the regular levels, because dopamine is a little bit, not as active as it would be in a different brain. And so, it is very much about understanding that dopamine system when it comes to a child who has ADHD as well. So part of understanding their strengths is seeing what they're just really, really interested in. And that is one of the indicators of what you where you want to light the fire,
That's
know?
right.
And then, when they are avoiding other tasks, there can be, again, other comorbidities, right? When it comes to something like math, since you mentioned math. And at the Brain Accelerator, we have a math program too. And what is important to understand is that there are different phases that we target. So math is cumulative, right? So whenever there are any gaps in learning in math, that child is going to not be able to cope with the next lesson that comes their way.
Got you.
So
it's almost
if
like
they're
the foundation.
experiencing, the foundation could be missing, right?
foundations.
So if the foundation is missing, or if underlying processes are missing, okay, and they're not as strong as they could be, it affects that child's ability to go to higher order thinking. And so the initial tendency is avoidance, because it's hard, right? Or a child who has dyslexia will come in, for, let's say, an assessment at the Brain Accelerator, and this is a true example. And this child, we gave her one word to read, and she's like, I'm leaving, I'm out of here, I'm bored, I don't want to be here anymore. And, it was an immediate indicator that actually reading is really hard for this child, right? So we really want to understand what is the cognitive profile of the child based on attention. So selective attention, your ability to block out other, distractors and focus on what needs to be done. Sustained attention, your ability to sustain your attention for long periods of time, even when it's something you don't enjoy as much, okay? Divided attention, your ability to focus on two things at the same time. And then your executive functioning skills, your ability to plan, organize, time keep, etc. So we work on all of those aspects at the Brain Accelerator. And we assess for attention, logic and reasoning, processing speed, auditory processing, visual processing, and all the foundational skills that actually enable enhancement of performance and learning.
Brilliant. I feel like the Brain Accelerator is something that we should just all send our children to, just as a prerequisite. I mean, really. Because, what you're doing, yes, like you said, a lot of the times, children are, let's face it, they're kind of weird. Mm-hmm. Children are weird, right? From the very, very little. Yes, you meet developmental milestones. And then a quirk comes in and you think, is this normal? Is it not? It's that question that you should potentially reroute it to the Brain Accelerator.
I'm really excited about the information that even the assessment provides to parents, right? It's eye-opening. Yeah. And what I would say is that the norm is actually differences and divergence and not the other way around, right? And when we start to realize that each of our children, the same, children born from the same womb, okay, can be so different from each other, it's so exciting to understand how they think, right?
We can all agree that our style changes throughout our lives. The way we dress now is very different to the way we used to dress when we were in our 20s. Our minds change, our bodies change, and that's a completely normal fact of life. And as you all know, Wear That Now is a proud partner of this podcast and a huge factor to my ever-changing personal style. They make having a personal stylist so accessible, where your comfort, style, budget, occasion are all fully considered when they select bespoke pieces for your box and for your looks that get sent straight to your doorstep. What I love most about is their flexibility. If there's an outfit that you love, you keep, and the outfit that you don't, you simply return. So if you're looking to change up your personal style, but you don't really know where to start, head over to their Instagram account, which is at where.that.now, and connect with your very own personal stylist. I've got a question for you that's a bit sort of off topic. Do you think that there is an element of ADHD in all children?
So I'm very cautious to actually respond to that, right? Because I think that I think what I would like to say is that diversity is the norm. And in the society in which we live, just because it's easier to manage, okay, we are put into blankets, like we're just like, put into categories, put into grades, put into classes, and everybody should be performing at this in the same way at the same level. Okay. And I actually, as we're moving to personalized medicine, I wanted to see us moving towards personalized education.
Well, so this is my next question. I mean, like you said, you've got a class of 22, 24 children. And, to follow your different steps as to, obviously connect with the child, all the different things. It's very much an individualized approach. And I agree that I find teachers and, sort of education providers should be able to demonstrate all these things, but you're limited in your resources in a classroom setting. So, I mean, it's almost a catch-22. What does one do? You've got a parent listening to this and thinking, okay, well, I wish my school would do that. Should I be speaking to them to get an assistant? Should I be speaking to them about my concern? Is there a possibility to have an individual approach to children within a mainstream school?
So some families, right, in fact, a lot of families coming to me now are, have sent their children to some of the best institutions. And they're coming to me for an initial assessment because they're saying, well, something is just not right. My child is not motivated to go to school. Something's, my child is having, anxiety going to school. I don't know what's going on. And, when we do the assessment, right, and it is a 1-hour assessment, it is not a diagnostic assessment. It is an assessment to identify the cognitive profile of your child, to provide you with information that is useful, right? And when we're doing some of this assessment, I'll give you an example of a few families that came in recently with this type of concern. They were found to have very, very high skills across the board, right? And even though I cannot diagnose it as a giftedness, I'm able to say your child has very high skills, right? So the question is your child being, motivated enough in the classroom setting, right? And so that armed the families with that information to go back to the school and to open up that discussion, right? And so I think it's really important for us and for parents to be taking an active role in trying to understand their individual child. I think schools are doing their part as, one stakeholder. I think parents should be doing their part as another stakeholder. Any extracurricular, teacher is doing their part. And certainly, a place like the Brain Accelerator where, it really is not an invasive, assessment, or it's really a 1-hour assessment that gives you such an incredible view about your child that you can use it to start to even educate the teachers about what's going on with your student and with your child, and then create opportunities for them, right? So if the music teacher at home is like, your child is just an incredible musician and he's not being selected to be in the school choir, or that's, then that would be a great opportunity to bring the music teacher into the school and have that conversation,
Absolutely.
Or if, I'm doing the assessment for your child and I find that your child has very elevated skills. Great, get me into the school, have me talk to the teachers, and let's create a plan, right? So we work together, we work as a team. And we don't just rely on one stakeholder for all the work.
Honestly, I love that, because what you're saying is you have to have, obviously you have to advocate for your child, and you have to have an active role in, at the end of the day, we can't all homeschool. And school is there. Obviously, we need to educate our children. But again, they're not potentially meeting their individual needs. So for you to seek external support and then somehow package that up and bring it to the school to have that, sort of communicated with the teachers and the support staff and whatever it might be, could potentially be a way forward. But then having said that, on the counter argument is, well, is everybody going to do that?
And, I mean, I think it should be more about a regular conversation and a two-way conversation or a three-way conversation or four-way conversation, rather than, oh, this is what the school said about my child. Oh, that must be true. Do you know what I mean?
And almost like taking it home with you and then discussing it with your child, who could potentially be completely oblivious to what's going on.
Yeah.
As opposed to understanding and speaking to somebody who could really kind of unpack that.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. Because parents, I mean, look, at the end of the day, we all want our children to do well and succeed. And, there is this desire to conform, for sure. But, it gets a bit quite jarring, I think, and especially in our fast-paced life, we're always wanting, good, math test scores. You want good behavior. Don't get in trouble. It is a lot to expect from a child. Yes. And then if you've got a potential teacher or, again, an education provider that may not be educated enough or well-versed to be able to speak to the parent about their concern correctly, it's going to throw you completely off. Yeah. And it might trigger something else that, sort of down the line. Yeah. That will be, again, counterproductive to when you're trying to figure out what's going on with your child. Yeah. And that's, I think, where the issue is. Yeah. It's the delivery. The delivery from schools to say, you know what, John is being really disruptive. He can't sit down in circle time for 20 odd minutes. That, then it's sort of, you can almost pass the ball to the parents who have absolutely no clue what to do.
Absolutely. And that's why, I think it works it works as a win-win-win when the lines of communication are open.
Absolutely.
For the school, it's beneficial to know what tools and strategies and, what to have in their toolbox if there is a child that is, has these red flags, right? Or if there is a child that is gifted, or if there's a child, right? It's helpful for the school to know that so that they're able to take measures to actually, help that child succeed, because that is in the best interest of the school. That's what every teacher wants to do.
Absolutely.
Right? So we and as parents, that's what we want too. As a child, the child wants to, to unlock his or her full potential. So we're all on the same team, right? So if we take it as a team-based approach, I think the way we will unlock potential and create positivity and create confidence and create self-worth, I mean, that's going to just be amazing.
I mean, in a perfect world.
Yes.
What would you like to see school-wise? I mean, I think all schools should, honestly, the prerequisite is to take a course with the Brain Accelerator. That's my opinion. Because if you don't have the tools and the skill, how are you going to handle situations with young, impressionable little children who have no idea what's going on, and it's their first time going through these, protocols in school and all the kids. So how do we address that from a fundamental core level?
So I think what's kind of going back to and alluding to what I mentioned before, I think what's not happening enough are these multiple way lines of communication. I think it's very much the doctor telling the parent something and the parent getting worried.
Absolutely.
Or the parent saying, okay, maybe I don't need to be concerned about my child's language development because she's only 4, and that's incorrect information. Okay. So you're not going to the most believable source when it comes to a certain aspect of your child's development. Okay. So you really need to be, as a parent, careful about who you are turning to for the right kind of advice, okay? And if there is a disconnect, or it could be what the teacher is picking up about your child is very much aligned with what you know about your child. And then you're like, okay, we're in sync. Let's work through this. Fantastic. And then there can be times where there is a disconnect, okay? And maybe that disconnection is because you feel uncomfortable about the information that is coming your way. So you need to check that in yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? And say, look, if there is something that can be improved upon and it's being brought to my attention, I've got to put my anxiety and, my fear of stigma aside. And I've got to do something because it's going to be in the best interest of my child to explore and be curious about what has come up. Okay. So the idea, I think, is keep your curiosity, like keep the curiosity open, okay? We want to constantly be curious about our children, about their state of mind, about their, about what they're interested in, about what the teacher said. Okay, that's an interesting point. Oh, what the music teacher said. That's an interesting point. Oh, what the, so how am I putting all this information together, right? Sometimes it can be challenging to be the parent case managing everything yourself, right? Which is why I play a very active role in with the parents that come to me. And I'm the one who personally goes to the schools. I will talk to the teachers.
Aalia, that's
I'll
amazing.
bring everyone together.
That is amazing. Honestly, the fact
and it's
that
case
you do
managing.
that, because you technically have, again, you've got the skill to put forward. Parents don't, and they're ruled by their emotion. Because obviously it's their child.
Yeah.
So it's so amazing that you offer that level of support, because really, parents, again, you go into a school and all you have is your emotional connection with your child.
Yeah.
And it becomes very difficult to communicate what you need, what the child needs. Yeah. And it just becomes almost a big mess as opposed to something quite constructive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's amazing that you do that.
So I think that's very important. And I think just the openness on all parties to work with each other. So creating forums for that to actually happen, without there being defenses up, that we're the school, we know what we're doing. We're the doctor, we know what we're doing. We're the parent, we know what we're doing. We know our child best. Let's put our defenses down and let's work together. And that's what I would say is the most important aspect that we need to think about.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Obviously, your whole life, you've been kind of studying the brain. So I guess my question has to be, what are some neuroscience-backed strategies that parents can potentially help their children learn and be interested in learning and sort of push them to their fullest potential?
So I love this question.
I'm
very nerdy about this question.
I love that you love it.
So look, the first thing, right, and this is my message of hope. Neuroplasticity, which is your ability to build new neurons, okay, and create new pathways in your brain, is that potential is always there, no matter how old you are, okay? So always know that your brain can change, okay? And that's number one. Number two, it is, this is what Dr. Kennedy says, is that it is not our job, okay, to make our children happy all the time. Did you know that?
I find that's a really tough, hard pill to swallow, because that's my main concern. Are you happy? You okay? What can I do to make you happy? That's my role as a mom. I need to make you happy all the time, every single day.
And that's a misconception, right? It is our job as parents to create boundaries, okay, and to help our children navigate difficult feelings, okay? And that's how we build resilience, okay?
Love that.
And this is what Dr. Kennedy says, and she actually has this amazing visual, which I'm just gonna use my fingers for, okay? So let's say you're learning something new, and this is what we do with the Brain Accelerator every day. We are changing, the way our mindsets work, and we're changing our brains as well, okay? So we work with resilience all the time. So let's say you're learning something new. What is it that you wanna learn, Raya?
Me? Like a skill, a new skill.
Yeah, like piano.
I want to be I want to be a better skier.
Okay, skier. Okay, so let's say you're starting out. And you're like, oh my gosh, my first time. Okay, so you're starting at point A.
I mean, I basically need to start. I barely know anything. Yeah.
So starting at point A, right? And you want to get to point B. Okay. And the space in between is called the learning space.
Okay.
Okay. And what do you think? Do you think it's a state of flow?
No.
Do you think you can have lots of falls and lots of tumbles and lots of scrapes?
Absolutely.
100%. Okay. There are going to be ups, there are going to be downs. And guess what? It's going to be actually frustrating.
Absolutely.
Okay. You are not in a state of flow. You are in a state of what Dr. Huberman calls limbic friction. Okay. And that's what we need to realize. That's what's building the new pathways in our brain. And that's what's creating resilience.
Limbic friction.
limbic friction,
that
the
agitation.
learning space.
Yeah.
It's not easy,
No.
and it's okay that it's not easy,
No,
right?
absolutely.
Because
It's like
sometimes
watching a baby start walking.
yes.
The up and down, the up and down, the up and down, and then they're walking.
100%. And that is actually the word failure now,
Yeah.
okay? So when we talk about the word failure, now all these entrepreneurs, they're talking about this all the time. Fail,
You have to
fail
fail. It's the
hard,
only
you
way
have
to grow. It's the
right?
only way to grow. You
Right?
got to fail. Keep failing.
It's so true. And why is that, right? It's because when we fail, okay, our brains light up even more than if we get the answer correct. Okay, that means our brains are open to learning.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a good thing. And if we fail and we have a growth mindset, okay, what's a growth mindset? You're understanding that nothing is fixed. IQ is not fixed. I'm bad at math. No, that is not fixed. Okay, when you understand that anything you work on can improve, okay, that is growth mindset. Yet, the power of yet. I don't know how to do this yet. I'm not, an awesome skier yet, and I will be. I'm working on it.
Yes. I am not an Olympic skier yet.
Yes, exactly.
Watch me, guys. Give me a few months.
Exactly, right? So, and then when you have a growth mindset and you fail, your brain lights up even more. Okay? So the potential of that, it's incredible.
That. I feel like I'm going to take that little snippet that I'm going to replay that to my children every night.
100%.
I love it. And it's so true. It's so, so true. It's that growth mindset. But again, you hear it so often, but you kind of lose touch with what it actually means and how it applies to your life. Because again, we've got this constant catchwords and the growth mindset and the failure and things like that. But when it comes down to it in practicality, it really is the truth. You're not that good yet, or you're working towards something, and that is, you are going to get there.
Yes.
The failing and the sort of picking yourself up, that is almost half the battle.
100%.
I love it.
And that's really what we need to teach our kids. And, that's something I was working on. So both my kids have done the program. Okay. And
I'm going to bring my boys. I've got 4 and 7. Do you take a 4-year-old?
4.5 is the youngest.
Okay.
And so when your son is 4.5, you can bring him in. And what's so interesting is we worked a lot on her positive affirmations and her resilience building, because she's a perfectionist. And so she gets everything right. Everything's got to be perfect. Her hair, and she does not get that from me. I'm not that. But she's really, and so sometimes she would avoid taking risks. Okay. And so we really worked on that every day, and what was so cool about this is that the neighbor's kid is also a boy, and I have a son, and they were playing this new Nintendo game, and she was around with her friend, and they were kind of taking a backbench. They didn't really want to try. We're like, come on, Eliana, do you want to try? And she's like, no, I'm just going to watch and see what happens. And then slowly you could see her talking to herself, like in her head. And then she tried. And then she did it, and she did so well. And then later that evening, she talked to me and she said, Mom, I was initially scared because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to, if I'd be pressing the right buttons, or I'd be able to do it correctly. And then I told myself, Eliana, you're going to try. You're going to try, and you're going to do it. And so I did it, Mom. And then I got 3rd place, and then 2nd place. And then, Mom, I did it. I came first.
Yes. Well done. How amazing.
So it's a beautiful thing. It's really, because she's using that lingo now all the time. It's fantastic.
That is fantastic. I mean, that's what you want. You want your kids to go a little bit outside their comfort zone. You don't want your kids to fall and crumble. You want them to sort of pick themselves up, slowly but surely dust themselves off and try again.
100%.
Life is up and down and side to side. And we're not only just talking about school, literally like every aspect of our lives. So you almost want to arm them and protect them with that ability to be resilient and to have, I'm going to say it, and I don't know if I'm using it in the right concept, to have that level of neuroplasticity.
Yes. It's almost like, it's like your cognitive flexibility.
Yeah.
Right? Because this world is going to require that. You need to be cognitively agile.
I
right?
love it.
To be able to we live in a world where knowledge is going to be everywhere. Okay. So it's no longer, learn this date or learn this, name or whatever it may be. You're going to have to learn new information at a much more efficient and effective pace than ever before. So your ability to be agile, right, and to be able to learn information fast is going to be what sets you apart in the age of AI.
Got you. God, I feel like that should be a part 2. AI.
Yes.
Tell me,
Yes.
where does medication fit into all this?
The way I like to think about it, right, and also the way Dr. Cruz talks about it, is that it's one tool in the toolkit. Okay, so it's not an end all be all, fix everything, fix all my problems type of situation, but it is a tool that can be very helpful. Okay, that along with education, support, structure, right, compassion, okay, they come together. And so the positives of medication, right, which again, if you are considering that, you would need to go in for a formal diagnosis and you would need to see a psychiatrist who would also, be able to give you the right dosage and help you play around with, what kind of, because sometimes there is that, is it the right
like
medication? Is it the right? There is a buffer period, right? So it will, yield very quick results in terms of improved focus and attention, and thereby, improved regulation, self-regulation. It can improve your confidence because now suddenly you're able to, access, learning that you weren't able to access before, right? Because if we think about it, how does ADHD affect us in the classroom? Attention is the foundation, right, upon which all learning is built.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if you are unable to pay attention, your ability to, retain information, your ability to focus, just to learn everything that's happening in the classroom, it's just inaccessible. So it really does become an important, opportunity cost that you need to weigh. Super, super important. And then the cons of it, right, is that they're not a magic fix. They don't work in the same way for every child. Some families might say that, I feel like my child's personality is different when the child is on the medication. It can have side effects, short-lived in the sense that it can, wear off at certain times in the day. And, there can be a risk of over-reliance, right?
Question.
Yeah.
Once you start medication, is it like a point where you then wean off, or is this a medication for life?
So I think that might be a better question for a psychiatrist.
Okay.
I do think that, I don't think I would be the right person to answer that question, but if it's helping, and because it tends to wear off. So my assumption is, and do not quote me on this, but the assumption is that you do have to continue to take it in order for it to have that effect on your brain.
Gotcha.
However, a psychiatrist would be better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's almost, it's sort of an individualized decision when it comes to medication.
Yeah. And just kind of bringing it back to the Brain Accelerator a little bit is that, there are a lot of parents who don't want to go the medical route, right? So we want to also help them, understand that there are other aspects that they can try, other interventions that they can try at least to see if it makes a difference for their child, right? So for example, of course, I mentioned occupational therapy before. Also at the Brain Accelerator, we start as young as 4.5, and we work very specifically on attention, right? 4 different types of attention every second the child is in the room. We even have distractions input and embedded into how we set up the room because we want the child to be able to focus despite the distractions around him or her. Mm-hmm. And 50% of individuals that do the program with a diagnosis of ADHD say that they don't need to go back to medication afterwards.
Wow.
So that's really fantastic. Of course, it's not for everyone. It's 50%. And even if it can help your attention, in ways where you can maybe reduce the amount of medication you're taking, it's definitely worth a shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that again, where do I sign? I mean, it's just but tell me a little bit about the Brain Accelerator.
Yeah. So at the Brain Accelerator, we enhance cognition and we enable the child to unleash their brain power. We help them think better, learn faster, perform more effectively. So as mentioned, we have a test, which is 1 hour long. It's called the Gibson test. It's based on the same theories of intelligence as other psychological measures. And it's also standardized according to Woodcock-Johnson and measures that other psychologists would know about. And it's just a really lovely way to understand your child. And then based on that, we would recommend a program. We run 4 programs. One program for younger kids, the Accelerator RX program, the Brain RX program, which is our flagship program where we're really trying to enhance and work on our underlying processes, which I'd mentioned before. There are 7 of them, which form the foundation of learning and performance. And so we enhance those skills. And then we have a math program, which starts at age 8. And we have 3 phases to the math program where we build foundational, skills if there are any gaps, or if there is a child with dyscalculia, who needs to build foundational skills. And then the second phase is where we build your processing areas, the underlying processing areas, and we build automaticity with math facts. And then we move on to higher order thinking, flexibility, like cognitive agility. And so we've actually in the US had an astronaut before going up into space do the program.
Wow.
Because it is a way to optimize your brain. It can be a child before going off to Stanford, right? Whatever.
Is this only for children?
No, children and adults. Yeah. So it can go all the way up to adulthood. And so it really is just an amazing way to just activate your brain. And then there's also a reading program as well. So children who are, have dyslexia or who are having challenges with reading, it's a really amazing way to activate and to work on those areas. And there have been fMRI studies. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically brain activation studies where there was a child who's reading a book without dyslexia and certain areas are activated. So you know exactly which areas should be activated. And then a child who's reading without, reading but has a diagnosis of dyslexia, and you see that there's no activation happening in the correct areas. And after only 8 weeks of training, the areas that need to be activated are activated now.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So it's really, really cool. And then one other thing that I just want to mention is that the advantage of the cognitive profile is it helps us to understand, where the breakdowns are happening. It's very easy, for example, to look at a child or to look at a child's results and to say, oh, this child is just not good at math, or this child is not. And
there we go with the labels.
Yeah. Right? Or even a label like dyslexia, right? Dyslexia, what does it mean? It means difficulty with reading. Does it tell you the whole picture? Does it tell you the root cause? It doesn't, okay? And I had a 13-year-old come to see me, and she has had a diagnosis of dyslexia since she was 7, okay? And, 80% of individuals with dyslexia will have weak auditory processing and weak processing speed. Okay. So you know that you can, work on those areas if those are the areas that are weaker. So certainly at school, that's what they were focusing on because the child has a diagnosis of dyslexia.
Of course.
And when I did the assessment, her auditory processing and her processing speed were perfect. It was actually her visual processing and her memory that were weaker. And no one had targeted those areas all these years. So we really help to identify where the weaknesses are and target them super specifically.
It's amazing. What made you what was the pivotal moment when it came to the sort of brain accelerator? What was something that you were just absolutely so passionate about to bring it forward to this, to have all of this? I actually had no idea that this is all that you guys do. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I've always followed my curiosity around the brain and learning and optimizing learning. This has always been my excitement, my joy, my passion. Seeing a child, seeing an adult just blossom and bloom and almost literally physical shadows lifted off of their faces, that's what drives me and that's what wakes me up every single morning.
It's your mission.
It is my mission. 100%, And all these years that I've been working as a speech pathologist and as a learning specialist, my thesis has always been around, we need to understand the core reasons for struggle. And only then can we know what we're targeting. And we need to be working with neuroscience. And a big portion of how we get the best results and the fastest results is through intensity. right? So it's always been my thesis. And so for me, it is this program, right, that brings it all together. And so it is a no-brainer for me. It is the way I'm going to make the impact that I want to make.
I think you are making a massive impact.
Thank you.
And it's honestly, I think whoever's listening to this, I feel like it's almost, I'm sitting across the table from you, and I feel like there's a bit of a sigh of relief that there is programs like the Brain Accelerator available.
Yeah.
That you almost think, oh, okay, thank God. You know, I can potentially go and talk to people that are going to be fully invested into understanding exactly what is going on with my child, as opposed to, again, as part of the bell curve statistical number, you know, this is what it is. That's what the school had told me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love the fact that you also offer it to adults.
Yes, 100%. And the number of adult calls I get every week.
Yeah. I mean, I could really use a little optimization.
It's, you know,
and I just feel in this day and age, I feel, yes, we do use our brains and we are very much, you know, trying to be as analytical as possible, but we are distracted.
Yeah.
Constantly distracted. I'd like to sharpen my attention on certain things. Sometimes I do it. Yeah. If I'm preparing something, I get distracted slightly and then I'm literally off on a tangent and I have to bring it back in. Yeah. But it's an active thing. So that would be incredible.
Yeah. And even if you haven't read the XX Brain, it's all about how women's brains change, right? During perimenopause and menopause.
Throughout their lives.
Yeah. So it is an important aspect of wellness that is not really being addressed.
I'm coming.
And can I just say something about the bell curve that you mentioned? When I was in school in the US, and this is also kind of part of, you know, why my understanding about how things are not fixed and the growth mindset piece is that, you know, I was on the north side of Chicago. And then, you know, Obama and the University of Chicago, that's the south side of Chicago. And, you know, we would talk about how the whole bell curve shifts from the north side of the whole IQ bell curve shifts from the north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago. Right? And why is that? Because the north side is more affluent, right? Where their children have a lot more, you know, maybe opportunities, resources. Parents are talking to their kids more, right? Versus the environment in the south. And so it is very evident. And even, you know, our Brain Accelerator, you know, at the Brain Accelerator, IQ shifts in a matter of months. The average increase in IQ is 21 percentile points.
That's why.
I mean, in a matter of months.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. Like, it's just like a 3.5-year increase in reading ability, 3.2-year increase in math ability in like 3 to 6 months.
No, that's an insane statistic. Right? It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
One last note.
Yes. Your
biggest dispelling of the myths in terms of your biggest misconception around ADHD.
Yeah. For me, it goes back to what I mentioned, because unfortunately, there have just been too many families coming my way they're so distraught by the judgment that my child is just badly behaved, and, you know, and disciplinary action is what we need here. Whether the child is 5, whether the child is a teenager, right? We really must look at, you know, their behavior as not willful defiance, but actually as a call for help because they are struggling. Yeah. And that to me is the biggest message I want to give out to all parents and all educators. Behavior is just a symptom of struggle.
Aalia, it's so important. What you're doing is so important. The message that you're sharing is so important. I'm pretty sure you're going to have countless parents listening to this and actually processing exactly what you have said, because what you're offering them is almost like a lifeline.
Yeah.
And it honestly, keep doing what you're doing and just advocating for children and what they deserve, because I mean, we live in a world full of labels, and to start at such a young age, we're doing them a disservice.
Yeah.
I always end each episode with a quote. I start with a quote.
Yes.
I find it puts everything in perspectives, and it gives, you know, such a lovely context to what we're going to talk about. And then I'd always like to end with a quote. So, but the quote is not going to come from me, from you, if you've got one for us today.
So I'm always a woman of words. And I have two quotes today, if that's okay.
I love that.
One is brain related.
Mm-hmm.
So this is by John Ratey from Harvard. The brain responds to use and disuse by either growing and remaining vital or decaying. And thus, for the first time, we are learning to see mental weaknesses as physical systems in need of training and practice. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I think that sums up, what we were speaking about.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorite quotes, which is very much aligned with your question around my mission. This is by Frederick Buechner. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
The perfect way to sort of literally, it came full circle. For everybody that wants to reach out to you and get in contact, I'm going to add all of the details of the Brain Accelerator in the show notes. Can they reach out to you personally as well?
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, get your, let's optimize these kids and give them a massive, bright future with no labels and full of opportunity, because they deserve it.
Thank you, Raya. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do and everything that you offer. Thanks so much.
Thank you.